Campus Whining podcast. Today we have a very special and exciting topic about charities, talking about OddBalls, Movember, and Her Campus Walk a Mile. We are joined by Rosie and Lily, so let's roll the
Hi, I'm Lily Andrews. I'm the president of Her Campus St. Andrews.
And I'm Rosie Grist, and I'm the secretary of Her Campus St. Andrews.
And welcome to this week's episode of Whining.
Yay!
So this week's episode is going to be about charities. If you're familiar with St. Andrews, you know that November is a big charities month. So I'm going to be talking about Fife Women's Aid and Walk a Mile.
And I'm going to be talking about Movember.
In this video, viewer discretion is advised.
There will be discussions about sensitive topics like cancer, sexual assault, and suicide.
So Lily, can you tell us a bit more about what Walk a Mile is?
Walk a Mile is an annual event that we host and that is hosted throughout the world, specifically in the States is where it started, and it uses the literal act of men walking 1 mile in women's high heels to symbolize an understanding of women's experiences and just to spark conversations and raise awareness about very important and really unspoken topics, especially with men, such as gender-based violence, sexual violence, and domestic abuse. And all Walk a Mile events raise money and donate money to either local or international charities that support survivors of gender-based violence, sexual violence, and domestic abuse.
So Rosie, you're both an ambassador for OddBalls Foundation and a sponsorship secretary for Movember here at St. Andrews. For listeners who might not know, can you please explain a little bit more about OddBalls and Movember?
So, obviously November is Men's Health Month, so the OddBalls Foundation exclusively focuses on testicular cancer and the importance of raising awareness and funds for testicular cancer research and early diagnosis initiatives. Movember is a bit more broad. It's about not only men's physical health and gender-specific cancers like testicular and prostate cancer, but it's also about the importance of men's mental health, which is a very stigmatized topic. So it's really about pushing for the destigmatization of men's health in general. So whether that's talking about how you feel both mentally and physically, to going and getting checked and seeking the help that you deserve.
Lily, as donations for Walk a Mile go towards Fife Women's Aid, can you please elaborate a little bit more on what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So Fife Women's Aid is an amazing charity that is local to our Fife community, which is extremely important for us as, an organization, Her Campus St. Andrews, to be directly donating to an organization that we know and love and trust. We've worked with them for the past 3 years and they're truly fabulous. Fife Women's Aid basically is an association that provides support for women experiencing domestic abuse and domestic violence. They also offer counseling, one-to-one services, shelter, and legal aid for women in need in our community.
Rosie, what role do you play as ambassador and sponsorship secretary?
So for OddBalls Foundation, I go to the local schools around Fife and Angus, and I speak to children or young people between 13 and 18 and sometimes older about the importance of knowing your body. I speak to both boys and girls, so it's really important that I get across the message that for women and men, because men can get breast cancer too, but mostly women who feel not ostracized by the idea that I'm coming in to talk about testicular cancer, but included in the conversation about what cancer is and how to detect and what to do and when to act. So I talk about how to check your body, what to do if you feel like something's wrong, the processes of treatment, whether that's chemotherapy, radiotherapy, surgery, and I really like to emphasize that although cancer is a really terrifying idea, most of the time cancer is completely treatable. For testicular cancer, it's 95% treatable when caught early. For breast cancer, it's a little bit more tricky because there's different types of breast cancer in different stages and tumour types. Same is true of testicular cancer, of course, but it's a little bit more difficult because that area of women's health is a little bit more underexplored. But yeah, I think the most important thing for the OddBalls Foundation is emphasising how to check your body, what to do when something's wrong, and they say check, detect, act, which is really the core trilogy of the OddBalls Foundation. For Movember, sponsorships is really about engaging local businesses. So we have partnerships with the Saint in St Andrews, with the Scotsman Group, McTatties, Bonkers, Ostara, and it's really about creating a collective and a safe community where men feel like they are surrounded by people who are intrinsically involved in helping improve their health services and their mental health services.
Lily, you've been a part of her campus for your entire university experience. How did this event first start in St. Andrews?
So actually this event was an idea that I had. I saw it on a couple of American college campuses because I'm from the States, and I have friends that are really involved in their universities, whether it's just being in student organizations or sororities, and I saw this event happening on a lot of different campuses throughout the US, and I thought that it would be a really exciting thing to bring to St. Andrews. I think that it can kind of get misunderstood as too lighthearted, but I think that the lighthearted nature of this event in asking men to come and walk a mile in women's heels, where it's fun and people get involved and it's lively, that is true, while also there is truth behind that, the fact that these men are gaining a new sense of knowledge on a topic that they may not know otherwise about. And I think sometimes, and I think you can maybe talk about this with Movember, but I think sometimes it's tricky talking about issues that are specifically tied to one gender, where the other gender feels like they shouldn't get involved. Or with men's mental health, it's tricky because there is sometimes a debate of whether shining a light on men's mental health is then taking that away from women's mental health. Same goes with gender-based violence, because of course, and domestic violence, which is what Walk a Mile is for. I think it can be difficult to get involved as the other gender, and I think sometimes it's almost a combative nature. But I think inviting, having events that are lighthearted, like Movember does growing mustaches, or they do fun things like going into the sea. Yes, it's fun, but it also shines light on a very important conversation that needs to happen. And I really believe that these conversations may not even begin if not started with something fun and lighthearted. And something that we really have strived to do since Walk a Mile started now 3 years ago, is have these conversations at the event. We don't just have this event and just make the men go walk along the streets. We're handing out flyers. We, have done a lot of research on statistics and make sure to, provide the statistics in the best way possible so that people get the information that they need. And so they leave not only feeling more, empowered to be a part of these conversations and to kind of help our community, but also they leave knowing more information. And so I think Walk a Mile has really, it's fun, and that's why we started it. But we started it because it's fun and we're getting people involved because it's lighthearted. And I think the conversations have been way more since, it began.
And to just jump off the back of that, like, as Lily says, there's absolutely no reason why emphasizing an event that happens to a specific gender, like domestic violence or mental health struggles, just because it happens disproportionately to one gender doesn't mean that it's unimportant to the other. Like, I think it's really important that we recognize that just because we're shining light on the fact that women experience domestic violence and men experience sort of stigma around their mental health, it doesn't mean that women and men don't experience the same actualities. It just means that this is important because right now there's not enough being done about their realities, and that is simply why we're doing it.
This question is for both of you. Why do you think it's so important to raise awareness about these issues and charities, especially in a university setting?
I think university is a very liminal stage in lots of people's lives. You go from childhood to adulthood in a sort of absolute manner where you're potentially leaving home for the first time, you're all by yourself, you're self-sufficient to an extent. And so I think you become vulnerable to scenarios and events that haven't necessarily happened to you before. I think in terms of domestic violence, while it's not necessarily experienced at uni the most, sexual violence is. Halloween is the number one time at uni, sexual violence as an act is experienced the most by university students over Halloween weekend. Like, that isn't a definitive statistic. And so I think that looking at gender-based violence and sexual violence in a university context is absolutely paramount to the idea of gender violence and combating the sort of assumptions that maintain it. I think with mental health as well, it's obvious, it's apparent, like, I've had mental health struggles at uni, I'm sure everyone has. You have wobbles, you get imposter syndrome, you feel lonely, you get homesick. And that might be an acute form of sort of mental struggle, but it's important to recognise that some people leave home for the first time and they're dealing with the stress of uni work, they might be dealing with the stress of home life. And there's so many factors, there's myriad factors that play into the deterioration of mental health, and university is ultimately one of them. Being alone, being or not feeling like you fit in potentially, especially in first year. I think it's important to recognise the impact of halls. And of course, like at St Andrews, we have wonderful student services, they're really great, but it's about sort of tapping into the rhetoric of accessing them, I suppose, because, you know, recognising that you're not feeling well is one thing, then going to student services and being like, I'm not feeling well, is a completely different ballgame, because you're talking about, okay, well, I'm not feeling great, but like, I'm fine, I can deal with this, and then admitting to someone that you're vulnerable and that you're not doing well and that you need help, and that's commendable and extremely difficult for most people. So I think we really need to place emphasis on the fact that accessing help for whatever reason is not shameful, it's not vulnerable, but even by proving that, it doesn't necessarily mitigate the feelings of weakness within yourself that have been continuously socialised.
Definitely. I think Rosie said it, you know, exactly right. And I think, you know, when we're going into the stage, you know, between just leaving school and then completely kind of being an adult, I think it's extremely important to start these conversations early. And, you know, I feel like, you know, kind of setting people up with, you know, having things like Movember and understanding that they're not alone with that, and Walk a Mile, and seeing, you know, all of this, like starting these conversations early is extremely important as people go into their adulthood. And honestly, I think that if these conversations were, you know, a thing everywhere, I think that, you know, mental health issues, I would hope that sexual violence issues, you know, just people having the understanding of what they are, and why they affect people so disproportionately, I think that's extremely important.
What is it about these charities or events that appeal or important to both of you personally?
So these, I feel like there's kind of two things going on, because not only are we doing Walk a Mile to bring awareness about gender-based violence, sexual violence, especially on a college campus, and also domestic violence. We're also doing this for Fife Women's Aid. That's where all of the money raised goes towards. So I guess I can talk about Fife Women's Aid and why that was kind of the charity that we initially chose to donate to. So in my hometown, I worked for the YWCA, I volunteered for the YWCA for 4 years before I left for university. And what the YWCA is pretty much, there's YWCAs all around the country in the US, and it's a women's shelter, and they do a lot of the same things that Fife Women's Aid do in their local communities. They provide legal aid, they provide counseling services, which is essentially what Fife Women's Aid does as well. And so that was extremely important, having volunteered for the YWCA, and just being there in the physical building and meeting so many incredible women and children, and just hearing what they had been through. I think it's extremely important to donate to local shelters like that, because the local shelters are able to do so much good for the women in their community. It's such a safe space, and the services that they provide, not even just the shelter, the counseling services, you know, the services that they provide for the children who have been affected by domestic violence and domestic abuse. These things are all so important in allowing women to have those next steps in their life. And I actually helped start one of my mom's friends started the YWCA Self Project, which was essentially helping women, you know, they have been, you know, they've gone to the YWCA, they have this shelter, and they're taking the steps for themselves and their children to start, you know, their next chapter, going to counseling, getting legal aid. But the YWCA Self Project essentially kind of is an empowering project, you know, to help them on their next steps, whether they want to pursue a career in, you know, business or go back and get further education, or they just want, you know, the best for their kids. It essentially helps them find the best way to do that. And so I think having that experience at the YWCA set me up to know that just the importance of organizations like Fife Women's Aid, and they do such amazing things for our Fife community, which is very large. But on the other hand, with Walk a Mile, why I chose that, and why I just think it's so important, is I just think it starts a conversation like Movember. It starts a conversation to something that's very taboo. People don't, you know, a lot of men don't really find themselves being a part of any of these conversations. And so I think it's so necessary to talk about gender-based violence, sexual violence, domestic abuse, and to have people understand, you know, the weight of that and the statistics, and also where to go for help, and how it affects people disproportionately on a college campus. I think these are all such important things, and so I think they tie together really, really well. So us being able to kind of spread the word with Walk a Mile, and then also in turn that into tangible, you know, a tangible effect on our local community, I think it's really awesome.
Yeah, I think similarly, like, obviously I'm not a man, and so I think that really like homes in the importance of supporting like charities that aren't necessarily for you. I think it's probably quite easy to like turn a blind eye and say, well, this doesn't affect me, so why do I need to get involved? But I mean, cancer specifically affects everyone. I think would be fair to say, like 1 in 2 people in the UK will get cancer in their lifetime, and that's a shocking statistic. And so I think with gender-specific cancers, whether that's breast cancer, ovarian cancer, testicular cancer, prostate cancer, you have to be collective and united in cancer research and fighting these things. I mean, there's lots of charities that, like Cancer Research and Cancer Research UK, that commit to treating cancer and helping cancer patients. But I think to really move forward the studies of specific cancers and how to treat them and how to destigmatize them, you know, Movember is investing in ways to improve prostate cancer diagnosis, for example, which is a really big killer in the UK, 1 man every hour. And so I think that making sure that you're aware that just because it doesn't directly affect you, causes indirectly affect you every day. They shape the people around you, they shape the realities around you. And so just because you feel like, you know, Movember doesn't apply to you because you're a woman, or that we're raising money for men's health, even though the system is already categorically created for men's health, I think it's really important to remember that doesn't mean that these people aren't deserving of help. You know, the gender-based violence system is created for women who are experiencing gender-based violence on the whole. That doesn't mean that it works flawlessly every time. That doesn't mean that they can't do with more money, or more support or more awareness. I think it's important to remember that although, you know, these things exist, it doesn't mean they can't be improved upon, because ideally, if these things were perfect, no one would die by suicide, no one would die from cancer, no one would die from gender-based violence or assault. And so I think in a university setting especially, we have to look out for one another. We're a cohort of like-minded people in a singular place, in a singular period of time. And I think that turning against one another because we think that the efforts that we're making for charity is inherently problematic, on the basis that why would you prevent someone from raising money for a cause that they believe in, that genuinely does better the lives of almost everyone, if not everyone, in our town.
For both Walk a Mile and Fife Women's Aid, as well as OddBalls and Movember, how can listeners get involved and make a change?
So listeners can get involved with Walk a Mile in kind of a number of ways. So the main thing, you know, that we really stress is, you know, donate to Fife Women's Aid, and we have all of their information on our social medias, as well as you can find them online. But just attend. It is next Wednesday the 19th from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. We are at 87 Market Street. And we just encourage people just to show up. Show up if you're a passerby, bring your friends, come alone. We've had some just amazing conversations with people that come and attend, and that is the most important thing, with things like this, that societies, like us, got consent, also do amazing work. Just starting the conversation around, just very important and heavy topics. Just start the conversation. We have so much information that all of our board members and social members are aware of. We've made sure we have flyers, pamphlets, everything. So if women can walk too, but we encourage men to come and walk a mile and in women's high heels, and we'll most of the time bring a board member with them so they don't trip and fall. And in those walks we have a lot of amazing conversations. So bring your questions, bring your friends, and get excited.
I think that really is the core message, is start a conversation. Like, whatever you do, however much money you donate, if any, it's about starting the conversation. It's about destigmatizing gender-based violence. It's about destigmatizing mental health. It's about destigmatizing cancer. You have to talk about scary and vulnerable and uncomfortable things to make a difference. You can't be silent because things will never change. If you're planning on getting involved with Walk a Mile or not, ask your female friends, like, how are you doing? Like, I'm not saying or suggesting that you should be like, have you been sexually assaulted recently? But be an open space where they feel, if that was the thing that happened, if that was an eventuality or a reality that happened to them, that you were someone they could tell because you would believe them and you would be supportive. Likewise, if you don't want to get involved in Movember or Modarts or Moball or the 1,000,001 things that they have going on this month, which you should absolutely get involved in, but if you don't have the time or the energy, speak to your friends. How are you feeling? How are you really feeling? How are you doing? What's stressing you out? Is there anything I can do to help? Do you want to grab coffee? Just start the conversation. Be there. Be a friend. Be a community. Like, be a villager for your village. Like, make sure that people feel safe to come to you. Make sure that they know where the support is. Help in any small, tiny, little, minuscule way that you can, because any help is help. Every little helps.
Thank you guys so much for watching. Remember to donate to either Fife Women's Aid, Movember, or any charity that calls to you. Walk Mile is next Wednesday the 19th from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. at 87 Market Street.
And there are so many events you can get involved with Movember. Check out Movember on Instagram, and we can't wait to see all the charitable things you do.